sometimes you're doing a podcast and you think it's terrible, and it turns out that it's great. And there's other times you do a podcast and you think it's great, and it's really terrible. So sometimes it's hard to know. And sometimes you can really tell. I felt it during the week, or actually this morning, about an hour ago. I listened through to all the recordings I'd made, and I felt, you know something, lads? This ain't good. The funny thing about it is that what made it not good as a podcast was that there was actually a certain residue of anger in it. You know, it's funny how if you're talking about anger, you can become angry. If you talk about something very calming, supposing you're at the dinner table and you talk about the war, or you talk about some social injustice that's happened, or some terrible atrocity or murder that's happened, it can bring an energy around the table which is quite disturbing. It can make, some people will even say, you know, stop talking like that, you're upsetting me. Because the very things that you're talking about, you use words and language to embody ideas in relation to, let's say, war. And for some reason, they have a kind of an energy that goes around the table and everybody gets edgy. So there's always arguments and fights about things like politics, divisive, conflicting politics, and religion. And it was the reason why, in the old days, old-fashioned country places would find that you were always better in the public house to ban conversations about either politics or religion, because it would start fights, it would make people uneasy. In Glangevlin in West Cavan, they used to actually ban singing, believe it or not, because there was a tendency in the old days for people to write satirical verses. And they'd write verses about their neighbours. Like those two neighbours were always fighting in Glangevlin. And there was a poet, and he wrote a satire about two asses on two different hills braying across the valley at each other. Now, it was ostensibly about the two donkeys, but in actual fact, everybody knew it was about the two neighbours. So if you were in a bar and you started singing that particular song, you might annoy somebody because there might be somebody who's a relation of the person in question. There was another song I remember. It was about a row at a party in Dowra where there was a crowd of Glan boys, as they called them, and they were down at this big party. It was an engagement or wedding party for a young one down in Dowra, and there was a big riot at it. Now, it would have happened many, many decades ago, but there was a song in my time that they still used to sing about it. And sometimes they'd sing it just to annoy. You know, there might be somebody in the room that was related to people that are mentioned in the song. John Peter Paddington, he threw a little party of which he proved severe, and they chased him all around the place with their long and sharp old spears. It was kind of, you know, one of them ballads, and a lot of crudity in it. But anyway, I suppose what I'm saying is that anger has a strange way of manifesting. Sometimes when you dwell on an angry subject, it's like there's a radioactivity on the anger, on the conversation, and it kind of flows out into people. And the opposite of that is probably why it's lovely to reflect sometimes on calm and tranquil ideas. When you meditate, they say, by the way, actually, you become what you meditate on. That's an idea in many, many religions. You become what you meditate on. And if you're constantly meditating on things which are kind of about anger and conflict, you kind of get angry doing it, it has a kind of a toxic effect on you, and you can end up an angry person. It's really difficult to talk about war. That's what I learned, I suppose, during my attempts to do the podcast this week. It's not easy, because you get infected with the disturbance that you're talking about. By the way, if my beautiful clock chimes this morning, which I hope it does, it has a mind of its own, my clock, and it's over there in the window, and it made a sound, and I thought it's about to chime, but then it decided not to. Well, I'm using it at the moment like a call to prayer. When I was a child, when I was in school, in primary school, there was a wonderful teacher, Brother Timothy was his name, and every hour he'd ring a little bell and we'd all go silent, and the prayer was the prefect in the room would say, "Let us remember that we are in the presence of God." And he'd say that every hour. And I really learned an awful lot from that tiny little thing. And I can understand how the bell, in monasteries calls people. Even imagine you're out in the fields working, and you hear the bell at a distance. The bell over in the church, but you're away out in the farm. It might be the 12 o'clock bell or the 6 o'clock bell or whatever. But it always is this reminder, like the sound breaking into the space is like God's presence breaking into the space that we are embodied in. And I'm using my old-fashioned Edwardian clock sitting on the window for the same reason, because the sound of it is so elegant that I feel it like a big church bell or a monastic bell. The only problem with it is that it seems to be a little bit erratic. It doesn't keep perfect timing. And the dong or the chimes in it, they seem to have a mood. They feel like going off when you least expect it. And then when it comes to the top of the hour and you are expecting them to ring, they don't. But the chimes of the bell and using it to interrupt the flow of ordinary life, calling me to something transcendent, calling me to remember for a moment that at this surface level of ego, at this surface level of life, samsara, there is only surface, but beneath it there's depth, there's a kind of an infinity of depth, if I can reach into the present moment. And so the feeling of the bell is like, it's like what's in the depth is coming towards me, not me reaching out into the depths. It's coming towards me. It reminds me of the actual infinity that exists in this moment. It's a sound from elsewhere coming at me. So I'm using it like that, and if it goes off during this podcast, I'll just wait for the chime to end, and you'll know why I'm being silent. To go back to my failed attempt to make a podcast this week, failed because of anger, getting very tied up and locked up in the images that come across the screen in the evenings from Ukraine, waking up sometimes in the middle of the night and wanting, as I go to the bathroom, wanting to get the phone, the mobile phone, and look at it and see is there any latest news from Ukraine. A lot of that is concern, fair enough. But then there's an obsessive level of it gets into me, and you find yourself looking at all the angry people on Facebook fighting with each other and ranting with each other and on Twitter. And it's like you're in this terrible pool of anger. It's amazing the amount of anger that has erupted in people on social media because of the war. And then I'm doing a podcast, and I'm trying to explain this. I'm trying to actually explain that anger is not such a good idea at all. In fact, it's very unhealthy. And when I listen back to the podcast, I find that there's a kind of a resonance, a residue of anger in the podcast. And so I had to stop it and say, I gotta start again. So now I'm trying to remember what I said. One of the first things I came up with was the idea, and it's a quote I got from somebody else, obviously. I just read bits and pieces from old books. I love the monastic tradition from the deserts, the Egyptian deserts when Christianity was about 300 years old, and you had these monks who were like psychiatrists or cosmonauts of inner space. They were trying to explore really what mindfulness was about. And I love reading them. They're really brilliant. And sometimes they read out a little line or two. But I saw a line, prayer is the absence of anger. And I thought that was a really wise one, because it's like the Tibetan Buddhist idea of non-violence, of ahimsa. It's don't put any coal on the fire, and then the fire will go out. So it's like rather thinking of peace and love as conceptual, substantial ideas, rather than thinking about them as like, I'll clench my fist and try and be a compassionate person. I'll really try and be a good person. That another way of going on the journey of life is to just think about everything as the fire of passion. Everything. Every action, every energy that you have, think of it completely, the whole thing, even the beautiful things, not just the ugly things and the negative feelings, but the positive feelings, the attachments, the way that you love your iPhone, the way that you love your wife, the way that you love your husband, the way that you love your mother or your child. All those really beautiful attachments. Just think of every single thing, as well as the dark bits, as well as the anger and the hatred. Every level at which you're engaged with the world beyond yourself. Just think of it as fire. And if there's a way to quench that fire, you see, peace in some strange way is the absence of evil. It's the absence of violence. It's not a thing in itself, because if it's a thing in itself, it's like we have to construct it. And if you're constructing the peace, it's not peace. If you're creating your own heaven, it's not heaven. It's almost like everything about us is passion, and everything about us is like a fire, and everything about us needs to be quenched. Again, not violently, not putting out the fire with a blanket, but just don't put any more coal on the fire. It's the best way you could describe mindful meditation. It's the process of not putting any more coal on the fire. Meditation, mindfulness, is like, the way you have to be still. The way you have to be, let's say, paying attention to your breath. The way you have to be focusing on one single thing. And the way that you become so still in your body, so aware of the rhythm, let's say, of your breath. And then you begin to notice this rapid flow of ideas, manic ideas, negative ideas, crazy, demented ideas, going through your mind all the time. And now you're watching this flow of ideas or angers or disturbing emotions that are flowing through you. And you keep going, you keep trying to breathe and be with the body and just be centered, and you find gradually they begin to die down. So you're getting to a place of tranquility, you're getting to a place of serenity, not by doing anything about it, but by stopping, by ceasing to do anything. You just stop everything, so that the body is so still. Actually, when you're in a mindful state like that, you can very often pick up sounds that you wouldn't normally pick up. You know, you'll start to hear birds in the garden, and you'll hear a car coming up the road at an awful distance, great distance. You become aware, you get tuned into a wider space, the more still you become in yourself. And that can be a really, in itself, hugely pleasant experience. But at the core of it is what I feel the threshold is. The threshold is where you're going to slip across from mindfulness to prayer. You're going to slip across to that space beyond the threshold of mindfulness, where you've so calmed yourself and so ceased to be agitated by anything. You've become so aware of just your being, your conscious mind observing, that you begin to get a sense that your conscious mind itself is being held. That is, the actual consciousness is not residing just in you. It sort of belongs at a wider level with the mountain and the lake outside the window and the trees, the tiny little buds that are coming on the trees. There's a sense of life, sense of being that's all around. It begins to feel like your consciousness is just a stasis, it's a state of being still that's not clarified around the perimeters of your body or your ego. And you're sharing in it. You're sharing in this sense of stillness. You're sharing in this sense of life, being here now. It's like that phrase that I use, be here now, being here now. It no longer has an I before it. It's not I am being here now. It doesn't feel like that, does it? And ask yourself that question when you've practiced a little bit of meditation. It never feels like that, sure it doesn't. It always feels like it's not me being here now. It's actually a sense of I'm sharing in the being that is here now. I'm sharing in the being that is here now. And when you get to that realization, you'll usually find a sense of affirmation, that in some way the cosmos is saying yes to you. You got it right. You got it right. It's not you being here now. It's your share. It's like going for a swim. It's like going into the ocean. You're sharing. Your sense of consciousness in that mindful state slips over the threshold, and there you are, being here now. But not you individually being here now, but that sense of you're sharing in the being that is here now. And Moses said, in that moment with the golden beautiful tree on fire, who are you? And the voice said, I am who am. I am here now. Is being here now. Must have been an amazing awakening moment. I'm here in my ego, I'm here in my life, I've become self-conscious, then I start meditating, and then I realize that when I am still, when I am in mindful, calm abiding, I open out to the being here, which is not me actually, it's the being here. It's wider than me. And that's where I talk about prayer. That's what I think prayer is. And I think that's like a truth that is not contained within one religion. But all religions reflect different aspects of this immense, immeasurable truth about human condition. And the way I try and put it in front of people who are, have given up on religion, is to say to them, that's okay. It's okay, because God was never a Catholic anyway, or a Hindu, or a Muslim. The being that is. The languages that humans use to express it, religions, are human. But it brings me to the second major plank of the podcast for this week. And as I say, unfortunately, I got bogged down in a kind of a negative energy on the previous attempts through the week. And now I'm really just giving you, as simple as I can, my passionate feeling about this magical and wonderful day, the 25th of March. For me, what's lovely about it is it comes after the equinox. So the equinox is the astronomical moment. It's the moment where we tilt towards longer daylight and less darkness. And every day from now on is this push towards midsummer. So it's just a beautiful time to be out in the garden, looking at the lake, walking around the place, getting out into nature and feeling grateful to be alive and to be in the moment. The feast of the Annunciation comes on the 25th of March, which is today. And in the feast, the story, the narrative is the angel Gabriel comes to Mary, appears to Mary, and says, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. So the angel is announcing to Mary that she will conceive. And conceive magically, conceive wonderfully, conceive just there in the Spirit of God, so completely present with her that the Christ will be born, would grow out of her womb. Okay. It's a powerful myth. It's a powerful myth in a true sense. I don't mean myth in the derogative, pejorative way. It's a myth that holds a truth so big, so amazing, that it can only be expressed mythically. But let's just, as they say, take it apart a little bit. Let's look at it. The angel comes and says something. This is what's going to happen. And the woman says, yes. Yes. That's the same moment I'm speaking of when you're doing your mindfulness. When you're doing your mindfulness, you get calm abiding, your body is still, your focus is good, you're beginning to see the river of mad thoughts flowing around, the disturbing emotions inside, but you're becoming distant from them more and more because you're able to acknowledge them, see them. And then, as you find that, what did they call it? Is it shunyata, I think is the word they use. But when you find that real deep calm abiding, you find you slip over a threshold and you begin to awaken to the sense of being here now, which is not contained within your ego and not generated out of your ego, but is actually holding your ego. Now there's the moment. And when people use church bells, they're a symbol. They ring out in the sky, they ring out across the village and across the fields. And even my lovely little Edwardian clock rings out, symbolically telling me that there is a transcendent depth to this moment. And from the far reaches of that depth, there is something coming towards me. There is something arising on the surface. Not me generating it, but something that I'm experiencing as coming towards me. So I'm in relationship with the sea. I'm in relationship with the mountain. I'm not looking at the mountain. My ego is looking at the mountain, but I belong to the mountain. It's the same way with a beloved person. The sense of love is like your whole heart is opening in a kind of a yes to the other person, that you can feel their presence just being there, and you just want to say, yes, I'm here. I'm saying yes to being here with you. And that's the yes, which is the story in the Annunciation. That the mystery of what is infinitely present to us. Something is telling us something. Something is speaking to us. It can often be a voice that just reassures us, calms us. It can be like a mother. I find that very, very strong sometimes, the whole sense of the motherliness of the universe. The sense that I can relax under a tree or by the lake, or sometimes I can just sleep like a baby might sleep in the calmness of the mother's arms. That it's like okay because everything around me holds me, and it holds me like the mother. The great mother holds me. And the more I go that direction, the more I can develop this relationship with the earth and with nature and with trees and with sky, that it feels like this surface is in some way the emblematic kind of representation of a depth, which is the mother. The great mother is minding me. And that becomes a relationship. But other times, the sense of what comes to you, what surfaces, what comes to the surface, out of the depths. Sometimes it can be, for a writer, it can be like my next new idea. Sometimes I write a sentence down and I don't know where it came from. Sometimes I try to write and I force it and I can't do it. And then I just relax by the fire and doze. And then I do a little meditation and I feel present. And I'm just like a fisherman looking at a still pool until a fish jumps. And it's like that. A new idea comes into the head and you wonder, where did that come from? How did I get that idea? Things surface. So you eradicate the anger. You try and get rid of every bit of anger by just being still in every moment. I think Tai Chi is good for this, Tai Chi, the way to talk about, like, your arm moves through the air, and yet it's not your arm forcing itself through the air. It's the leaf that reaches up, for the sunlight. The sunlight comes to the leaf, we can see that, but the leaf also reaches to the sun. There's a rapport in everything. And there is some surface movement inside where we see and feel and sense a new beginning, a new day, a new job. That can make every moment new. It's like, I find sometimes if you use that kind of prayerful meditation, then every moment is new. Every day is new. And I think in Buddhism they have the same notion. They talk about the bardo. You know, the bardo in Buddhist idea is that transition time when you die, and between the moment of death and whenever you find a new incarnation, there is this kind of transitional space. As the body decays, consciousness begins to fragment. It's all described very eloquently in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Now that's the great bardo of beginning, the bardo, the transition into new beginning. But I've heard some Tibetan teachers say that the bardo moment can be experienced in every moment. I heard a philosopher on YouTube recently, arguing or struggling with the idea of how do we even do anything? How do you get up in the morning without faith? How do you get up in the morning without faith? Like, how do you do anything? How do you love your family? How do you make the dinner? Wouldn't you imagine that? You'd get so bored making the dinner. How do you do it all again? How do we come to springtime again and do the same thing? Would we not get totally bored? And yet we don't, because it's new every time. What really can make it new is that hinge moment, mindfulness, slipping across the threshold into the state of receptivity and listening and the sense that there's something coming. Something of being here now is beyond you and is kind of sending you something. It's like sending you a message. And that's what the word angel really means. I mean, I think if you go back into the Hebrew, you'll find that, it's a messenger. The angel is a messenger of God, In that sense, maybe we meet angels all the time in life. I woke up about 5 o'clock this morning. Now again, the mornings are getting brighter. But I opened my eyes at 5 o'clock this morning, thinking about somebody who had passed away. She passed away a couple of years ago. And we were great friends. And I loved her very much. But for some reason, she came into my mind, just floated up and woke me up. Now that happens, all of us, all the time. Things surface in our minds. And they're like angels. They bring us a sense of depth, transcendent depth in every moment. And the voice from afar that comes towards us. And it's always guiding us to peace. Always. That's why you need to get rid of the anger. It's how mindfulness can work, because mindfulness, in the stillness that you get from mindfulness, you're eradicating all the anger, all the sort of forceful, energetic ego stuff, You're just being there. Getting rid of, and it's prayer. You go over that threshold and things surface. It's the best way to tell stories. It's the best way to write. It's the best way to kind of live your life. To live your life as that kind of space, and just follow these moments of wisdom and intuition. These moments when something surfaces. I'm going to finish by reading a little bit from What is Beautiful in the Sky, because it's a book I wrote during the first lockdown. It's a book I wrote when I was doing a lot of kind of meditation, and I did a book about just 24 hours of trying to be present and trying to see what's beautiful in the sky. And it was lovely weather at the time too, and this high pressure we're having here in Ireland this week reminds me of it, even though it's a bit early yet now. It's still only March. I hope you have a lovely weekend. I hope it's a time that you feel you can use the model of Mary in her stillness, in her prayerfulness, experiencing the angel coming to her with a message and telling her that in her will be born the great Christ. The transformed universe will begin in her womb. And she says, let it be unto me according to thy word. The transformed universe begins in your heart, in my heart, in every moment, every bardo moment, every transitional moment of life is now. So I will read you a little bit from the end of the book, What is Beautiful in the Sky, because when you get rid of anger, you allow yourself into that zone of being receptive. Things float up. Angels come to you. Insights, intuitions. And everything in that space, I believe, is good. You know, because it's the anger that's like a cloud in your vision. It's the anger that kind of twists your perception, and you see the thing in a distorted way, or you see an ugly view of the world. But when you kind of really be mindful, be still, be calm, now you allow the flower to come to you. It's not your eye, going over the landscape like a laser. It is your eye in a passivity that's allowing the things to come into you. And there's nothing that comes in at that stage that is not beautiful. The bees are awake, already busy. Perhaps I should speak to them, tell them that I cannot explain how I ended up at the edge of the ocean. I could assure them that there was no intention, no plan, no wisdom attached to the move. It was just an accident, accumulating through time like a tree that grows or a tree that falls. Because it's where the book ends, where this story ends, where the storyteller surrenders to silence and to the calm and quiet sea. And even if it doesn't happen, I will have written that it happened. I will have spoken my fate. Even if I have to wait until later, perhaps another month or two, a few years maybe, even if I never actually break out of this isolation, even if I never actually get there, it will be the way the story ended. So I told it to the bees, and they heard me. It was my faith, spoken in words, sculpted in time through the telling of it. I know they heard me, because even as this grief still seeps up out of the ground, the bees have begun again to gather and hum, to turn the mountain blue. And I can hear them singing, and I tell it to them again, that this garden where we stand now, in these hills above the lake, was never as beautiful or never as peaceful as in this moment, this now. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.